Alrighty, now we're going to get into the focal length of the lens. This is a really cool concept. I really want you guys to understand this, and you'll be able to understand when you see cameras or when you see things on the camera, you'll be able to understand what it looks like. So for example, you'll see sometimes something say 24 to 70 millimeters or 24 millimeters or 70 millimeters or 100 millimeters. That's just the focal length, right? They're letting you know how far this lens is going to zoom, or how shallow it's going to, or how little it's going to zoom versus what was wide angle, whether it's telephoto, what is it? So let me give you an example here. So this here is a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. This is a 70 to 200 millimeter focal length, right? And so what that lets you know is it lets you know when you put this on a camera, that's the distance that it's going to shoot. So let's say, for example, I have this on a camera outside, right? And I'm taking a photo. Well, I'm going to be able to zoom in to 200 millimeters, and I'm going to be able to zoom out to 70 millimeters. That's going to be the focal length of that, right? Let's say, for example, I have something which is like a 15 millimeter to a 30 millimeter. Well, then that's my distance right there, 15 to 30 millimeters. The one thing that I want you guys to understand, though, is that this lens right here is 70 to 200 millimeters for a full frame sensor. So if your if your camera is not a full frame sensor camera, then it's not going to be 70 to 200 millimeters on that camera. So let's say, for example, I put this lens on the 7D, which is called an APS-C sensor, right? Which means it's smaller than the full frame sensor on the 5D Mark III. If I was to put this lens on this camera, because this sensor is smaller, it's going to have a crop factor. The crop factor on this sensor specifically is 1.6. So this is going to be a little bit of math, so stay with me here. So if I was to put this at 70 millimeters on this camera right here, on the 7D, it would be 70 times 1.6, and that's what my focal length would be. If I was to put this on the 5D Mark III at 70 millimeters, it would be 70 millimeters, because this is a full frame lens and this is a full frame camera, right? So let's say, for example, I had a crop sensor lens on this camera. Let's say, just for example, let's say this right here is a 50 millimeter art lens, Sigma art lens. Let's say this was a crop lens, right? Crop sensor lens. It's made for APS-C crop sensors. If I was to put this crop sensor lens on this crop sensor, it would be represented appropriately. So if this was a 50 millimeter crop sensor lens and I put this on the crop sensor, it would be 50 millimeters. Now, it wouldn't work on this. You'd have issues with some of the sensor not being covered, so you never want to use a smaller sensor on a full frame. It's usually backwards compatible, but not the other way around. So just with that being said, understand your focal length. When someone says 24 millimeters, that they're talking about the focal length of the lens. And as you grow in your photography journey, this is why it's so important to just shoot every day. As you continue to shoot every day, you'll be able to even understand how far that is in feet, right? So 50 millimeters, I know it's about 6 feet, right? 6 feet is about a good shot for 50 millimeters. And you learn that from just taking photos and being out with your camera. You're going to be able to learn so much more about your camera by just getting out there and shooting. So just remember, that's the focal length. 50 millimeter on a full frame is 50 millimeters if it's a full frame lens. 50 millimeters full frame lens on a crop sensor is going to be 50 millimeters times 1.6.